Hi everybody, what I want to do here is to show you how I set up a grid for my documents. First I hit the New File button, and then I'm going to set up what the purpose of my document is. Right now I'm putting on facing pages, and I selected Portrait. My size is 8.5 by 11, and I'm going to be doing a 2-page spread, so I put 2 in pages. I do not usually like to use a primary text frame. I like to add frames as I go. And then I can add columns, set the number of columns, and then also the gutter, which is the space between the columns. And I can set my margins all in this section. It's usually a good place to create a title. Notice that with the margins you can either set them independently or you can lock them together and set one. So here I go, I'm putting in my title. And I'm going to press Create to show my document. Notice the pink line shows where the margins were set up. And it created 2 pages. From here we're going to be setting up our guides on the parent pages, so we don't have to set them up with each page. And after I set up the guides, I'm also going to be showing the baseline grid, which is usually what I do when I'm setting up a set of pages. Okay, so I'm going to View, then bringing down to Guides and Grids, and then down to Show Baseline Grid, and then you'll see the grids appearing horizontally across the page. To set up my baseline grid itself, I'm going to InDesign and Preferences, and then I'm going to go down to Grids, and you see the top thing is Baseline Grid. I can change the color, I can change the start place, which is at the first top margin, and also then the sizing, which is increment every, and it's set automatically for 12 points. I can make it 8 points, I can make it 16 points, whatever I want to. And then below that it says View Threshold. That's the percentage of size of your page it has to be able to see the baseline grid. So at 75% most of the time I can see it. If I drop it to 50%, that means I can see it pretty much all the time. And then you have also the document grid, which I don't use quite as often as the baseline grid. Next, I'm going to set up the guides by going to Layout and down to Create Guides. Once I click Create Guides, I have an option to set up rows and columns on my page. In this example, I'm setting it to 5 rows. Also, I'm going to eventually change the gutter settings, but I'm going to jump over to columns next. And also I want to make sure that preview is checked so that I'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm setting out my columns. I tend to like to work with a 12-column grid because it gives me a lot of flexibility. 12 is divisible by a lot of things. Now the gutters are kind of big, so I'm going to play with the settings a little bit, and I'm going to get them where I'd like them to be. Right now I'm set up in inches, so what I'm looking for is probably about 1/8 of an inch gutter, which our textbook calls an alley. So what I'm doing is I'm setting it for 0.125 inches. And then I'm going to click OK when I'm ready, and now I have a grid set up on my page. So now I'm going back to my working pages from the parent pages. Since the grids were set up on the parent pages, they end up on my working pages as well. And if I add additional pages, they'll be on the additional pages so long as they're assigned to the parent A. So that's how you set up grids in your document that you can work on. So it's guides and grids combined together to make a grid section that you find you can work with. Okay, now that I have my grid laid out, I can actually start laying out some items on there. Right now I'm putting in a frame, which I think I'm going to be loading a picture in that frame. Command D, once you have a frame loaded, you find the picture that you want. Click on it and insert it into the picture by clicking Open in the bottom corner, and then you can adjust it to fit inside your frame the way you want it. I usually use Command or Control E to make it fit entirely within the frame, or I can sometimes use Command Control C, and what that does is it centers it in the frame. So you see it fit to the width when I did the adjustment, and now I'm going to physically move the inner picture by double clicking to get to the picture instead of the frame, and it moves within the frame until I get what I'm looking for there. You can see I used rule of thirds there to put the person on the jet ski in the main focal point, the one that gets the most attention. So that's what I used when I was adjusting that, and the grid helped me place it in the right place. By setting up 12 columns, I knew that 1/3 of the way across was the 4th grid line. And the columns direction and also the horizontal grids were helpful in helping me approximate where to put the person. Now he's in the lower focal point because I wanted to show more sky. So next I clicked on T to get to the text tool, and I created a text frame. I clicked on the drop-down arrow by Minion Pro, which is the default font, and I'm selecting the font that I would like to use for this project. So for right now it's a title, so I'm using Arial Black. While in that section of the toolbar, I can also adjust the font size that I want. By default it's 12 points. I'm setting to 48 points for a title. And also if I wanted to, I could adjust the leading, which is right below that. And I could set my alignment. Now I'm switching from the character panel to the paragraph panel to align the text to the baseline grid. I don't always do that with titles, but in this case I wasn't sure if I was going to have another title on the other side of the page. So I wanted to align it so that both titles would line up in exactly the same place. Because at that point size it didn't all fit on one line, what I did was I wanted to see a couple other options, so I decided to bring the word your down with headline, and I centered the heading. That looks somewhat better. I could have also changed the point size and made it a little bit smaller to fit the whole heading in one line. So right now what I'm doing is I'm setting up some columns for my text. What I did was I made one big text box and switch to the paragraph panel, and you can see I can put columns right inside one text box. So this will automatically flow from one column to the next. I could also set up separate columns if I wanted different column widths, and then I would have to thread the text through the columns. Now I'm selecting my font that I want to use for my body text, and once I've selected that, which in this case I use Bookman Old Style, I wanted to choose the font size so that I have it properly aligned. So that looks like 18 points, and I can start typing. So this section I want to make a subheading, so what I did was I made it bold. I also made it span 2 columns for the heading section, so this way it would take up 2 columns instead of becoming 2 lines of subheading there. So now I move down a line by hitting enter to the next row, and you can see that I'm changing my font size for the body text, so that's 10 points, and I'm going to be adding in some filler text by selecting type and then going down to the insert area. I could fill with placeholder text, and then right now, because I had it set for 2 columns, the filler text span the 2 columns, so I'm going back to the columns tool and I'm going to choose span 1 column for the body text. So now you can see my text automatically flowed nicely into the 3 columns. I selected the 3 columns of text, and then I went over to align to the baseline grid, and you can see that by aligning to the baseline grid how nice and neat everything looks. Then I went over, I wanted justified text in this case, so that my columns look nice and even on the ends. You can see the little black rivers when it's highlighted like that pretty well, which I'm going to have to go back in and adjust. Another thing I did here was I wanted to increase the spacing between the columns from the gutters I had originally chosen. So I went to the margin adjustments and I created a little margin at the beginning and end of each line that gave me a little bit more spacing in between the columns. At this point I turned off hyphenation, and that actually gave me bigger rivers. So then I had to go back into the tracking, as I showed you in another video, to kind of make those rivers a bit smaller and to make the text look neater. So off camera I did some of the second page. I used a different solution for the columns. Instead of setting up one big text frame and breaking it into columns, I used 3 different text frames which I tied together to let the text flow through those frames. And I purposely used one that was 2 columns wide and then 2 that were 1 column wide to show you that having a grid can help you make a variety of choices. Have a wonderful day, everyone.